Hey, check out this message prompt I built. It's a modal. It's used to present a message to a user whenever something important needs to be communicated. And it's going to be part of my application called Pocket Investor. I want to take a second to show you how it's built. Without further ado, let's jump into the code. So to build this wonderful component using Vue 3 and Nux 3, I'm going to create a file for the components. And then I'll create my template section. This will be the HTML markup, and I'll have the script tag, which will be the logic for the entire modal. And lastly, I'll have the style that's going to help to add additional customized CSS for the overall modal itself, the message prompt. So at this point, I will be using the teleport functionality within Vue 3. This allows us to place the modal anywhere on the document where I want. It's going to be specifically here right after my application itself, so that it is in front of everything and is very much full screen. So I'm using the to attribute to indicate the CSS property where I want the modal to be teleported to. So at this point now, I'm creating the modal backdrop, the message prompt backdrop. This will be an overall positioned fixed, and it's going to be position absolute so that all corners of it's going to be at the very edges of the screen. The Z10 CSS class is from Tailwind, and it indicates that it'll be positioned in front of everything, at least 10 integer units in front of everything else. And now I'm just going to create a class that wraps the backdrop of it and make it so that it's flexed and it's position centered. So therefore, when I create what will be the modal shell itself, the rectangle that's going to appear, it's going to be positioned in the center of everything. And here I'm just going to test this out. And as I reload, we see that our rectangle is there, or modal is working as we intend. All right, so what we just noticed is that our modal is always on, our message prompt is always on, and we need a way to turn it on and off. And so to be able to control that state, I will need to create a Boolean variable that controls the state being on and off. So in that case, I'll create a constant called showModal. And it will be a reactive variable that will hold a Boolean state for on and off. Actually, in thinking about that, it should really be a reference. And I'll change that there, and it's going to take in an initial value of false. It's being imported by Vue 3, and I need to then export the showModal variable in my setup function. And it's going to then be returned to the component when the component is created. Back up here, I need to create a variable that's going to be pushed, and when it's pushed, it's going to change the state to from on to off and vice versa. It's going to essentially toggle the state of this modal. So I'll go ahead and save that, and we see, okay. Now, to get VModel to work, I'll need to make use of a composable that I created as part of Pocket Investor, my real estate investment calculator episode series. Now, this composable returns a computed state property that has both a get and a set method, and it's going to VModel a prop called modal value. So essentially, for Nux, it auto imports this. And so I will then create this modal value that is going to be of type Boolean. And within my setup function, I will return a variable called D that makes use of this computed property after I pass in props, emits, and the modal value that I'm going to VModel essentially. This is how you create a VModel within Vue 3. So here I will then make use of this value by making sure that whenever this button is clicked, it will change the state of the variable called D, which is again a computed property, and it'll set it to a value of false. And then an event goes up to the parent to then make sure that this showModal is closed off. Now here I noticed that it's basically messing up my application because I'm using teleport. It took me a second to realize that that is the issue. And so all my elements are being repeated more than once for some reason. After I just kind of like figured it out it took me about 10 minutes or so to figure it out that the issue here is that I need to wrap teleport around a div tag. And so I went ahead and made that change here. And once I refreshed, everything was able to work once more. So there we go. Phew. Now it's just a matter of testing out my modal to make sure it opens and closes. And as we can see that when I click the modal from within the modal component itself, it does close. Now the next order of business is to now add some transitional animation so that as the modal is appearing and closing, it has a gradual and as a transitional animation that appears. In this case, the background fades from no opacity to darker opacity. And so this is directly taken straight from Vue itself, where there are 6 classes that are applied for enter/leave transition. If you wrap an element around a transition element that is always present regardless of whatever component or app you happen to be in. So as we can see, all those classes correspond appropriately here. I'm transitioning from 0 opacity all the way to 100. So V transitions are triggered whenever there is a VIF, VShow, or a component that's being toggled. And because it's triggered by V4, we're going to copy this V4 and paste it here so that the rectangle itself can also be animated. In this case, I want to animate it so that it scales up and kind of translate into appearance. So as I open that up, it kind of pops from the background and pops upwards. So it kind of gives it a nice kind of increasing size animation. Next, I want to use slots to be able to have custom content for the modal at any point in time. So I'm going to create a default slot. So a default slot is one that does not have any name attribute for the slot. And so Vue will recognize this as a place for whatever I type in to be kind of represented as the main body of the modal. So I just inserted some HTML and it becomes Pocket Investor, the greatest real estate investment calculator ever known to man. And so here my stuff gets inserted in that slot I defined. I need to go ahead and do the same thing for both the header and the footer for this modal, for this message prompt. So I'll go ahead and create, I'm just going to wrap it around a larger div that says modal content. Then I'll create the same for modal header and I'll give it some pattern and I'll round it off so that the top has a nice kind of curved edge around it. So I'll copy the header section and just kind of duplicate it also for the footer section, and then just make some minor tweaks, adjust the class names, and then remove the close button. And that should be that for both the header content and the footer for the modal. I will then give the footer, header, and the content a nice white background so it has a very kind of clean appearance to it and gives that roundness that it needs. Inspecting the page, we can tell that the header and the footer is there. So with that out of the way now, I need to now change the styling of the close button and just kind of replace that with a actual icon of sorts. So I went to Tailwind resources, I copied their X button and just pasted it in there. So now we have a nice clean X appearance there. So that's looking good. Next, I'm going to kind of clean up the actual usage of the modal by having an actual slot be named. So I'm defining the header section and the footer section, and refreshing and seeing what it looks like. So that's to my liking. And we see that everything is appearing where it should appear. So with Tailwind, with composables, with View 3 and named slots, we're able to create a very slick looking modal message prompt that can be reused all throughout your application to convey meaningful information to users. Alright, that's going to do it for this video. I hope you enjoyed the video and you learned something from it. If you want a copy of the source code to this modal, please go ahead and check out the link below. If there's something that you would have done differently or like to see more of, go ahead and drop a comment below. Don't forget to like the video. And again, my name is SolidusCode. Until next time, check out my other videos.